Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the 12th edition of Apeejay Kolkata Literary Festival. Today, we are in discussion with Indian Canadian actress, television host, model, philanthropist, and social activist Lisa Ray. Today, we'll talk about her relationship with Kolkata, its cultural legacy in her life, her writing process, and her book Close to the Bone. Close to the Bone is Lisa Ray's brave and inspiring story of a life lived on her own terms. In discussion with Lisa today, we have author, journalist, and columnist Sandeep Roy. Over to Sandeep to take the discussion forward.
Lisa Ray, welcome to the APJ Kolkata Literary Festival. And I'm so glad you could join us, even if it's virtually.
Yes, thank you, Sandeep. I wish I was there, to be honest. I'm getting a little bit of Kolkata flavor. I can hear a little bit of the sounds of the city behind you. So that's that's the bridge that's bringing me in. But I'm so glad to be in conversation with you. I really enjoy our conversations.
Thank you. Actually, it's funny when you mentioned the little sounds of Kolkata, because no matter what the time of the day, no matter the quietest place in the house you see, there is a bit of the city that will always seep in, which actually leads me to the first thing I wanted to ask you was, having grown up in a suburb in Canada, with just your parents around you in the house, what was it like for you to come to a place like Kolkata and, not just geographically difference in texture, and have suddenly an extended family around you all the time?
I'm smiling even just recalling it. And, I think of that my experience growing up, I mean, this is the late 70s or 80s, really, of, traveling to visit, it's a little bit of a dutiful visit as well. You have to travel to visit the family and bring lots of, presents. Our suitcases were over. Sorry?
Camé soaps. I think that's
Camé soaps and Walkmans and chocolate and everything was stuffed in. But I think it's actually a relatively common experience for a lot of Bengalis of my generation who were born abroad from the diaspora. I think maybe where my experience deviated was that I never looked upon my experiences in Calcutta with any sort of disdain or superiority. I loved it. I felt very much at home, and I felt very much engulfed by everything. Like you said, all the sensations and the sounds and the experiences in such a way that it was almost like my life was flipped. I felt that I was a stranger or an intruder or an interloper in Canada. And I always felt innately that Calcutta just was meant to be where I was meant to be. And that is different from a lot of other kids of the diaspora that I've heard discuss these experiences of going home, visiting family. But I also thrived, I think, on the family dynamic, being an only child and coming from a very quiet suburb. Now, that's not to say that I don't value solitude and quiet, because I actually do. And I think we're all contradictions. We all have conflicting stories within us. So, I have been living in India. I mean, I always have one foot in India. Spent extensive time. We were living in Mumbai up until recently. And, it's the usual story. When I'm there, I'm longing for quiet. And now that I'm sitting in an absolutely serene, idyllic little small town in British Columbia in Canada on the West Coast and, ensconced in the mountains. I was just telling you that I love hearing the sounds of Calcutta behind you. It's just really, it's like food for me. It's food for my ears. And I miss that. I miss the chaos. So, I mean, I've kind of now reconciled myself to being this contradiction.
Yeah, I think that's the only way.
Right? Living contradiction. And for a long time, of course, it was a struggle trying to figure out where is it that I live. And, I'm never completely of a particular place. But I've been thinking more these days about modes of displacement, you might say. You know, how we migrate, how we explore, how we are displaced, and what that means, you know, and the conversation around that, and how the language actually ends up framing the experience. It can be a similar experience. Like what, you know, I've also been thinking about the fact is like what makes you an expat and an immigrant, right?
Mm.
All of these things are very, they're very political, they're very charged kind of
And
words.
very fluid, because they change. You're never, you don't necessarily have to remain one thing all the time, because as you change,
Not at
those
all.
labels slide on and off you. But speaking of language, when you came to Kolkata, did you pick up Bengali?
Unfortunately not. My Bengali is very, very rudimentary, embarrassingly so. But I just love, I mean, I can just stretch out on a, you know, on a divan and just listen to Bengali all afternoon. You know, for me, it's like listening to Italian. But it does transport me. For me, it's also, I feel it in my body. It's like a language that I feel in my body because it takes me, again, back to particular childhood experiences. You know, like I hear the language and then I see, for instance, one of my auntie's hands, you know, and the way that she used her hand, or maybe her hand is caressing my head, or I see the bangles, or, you know, I see the alta, the outlines of alta, you know, like it's very, very evocative for me, the language.
So when you would come here, and when you were in Canada, when your Polish grandmother, your mother's mother, would be there staying with you, was there
Yeah.
a contest between, in a way, between your Indian grandmother and your Polish grandmother about trying to entice you over to their side?
Well, there was, and I mean, from my Polish grandmother's point of view, there was, and it was quite comical. And I've written about it in Close to the Bone, because it's stayed with me, even though I was so young. You know, you would think that I wouldn't understand the nuances of what was going around, but children really absorb things. So interestingly, obviously, my Bengali grandmother, she, you know, she was a very there's something very regal about her, and a little bit at a distance, you know, from
Hmm.
everyone. So she wasn't, you know, it wasn't in the business of enticing anyone to do anything. You know your place and you do your thing, and somehow I think that, you know, that in and of itself was very attractive, you know, to me. But my Polish grandmother, who relocated to Canada for the first few years of my life to help bring me up, because of course we didn't have full-time help in Canada. She was determined to turn me into a good Catholic, you know, and you know, you know, I don't mean any disrespect or judgment or anything like that, but I'm just sharing my personal experience with it.
Hmm.
That she kind of, you know, forced me to go to church with her, not only on Sundays, but like there was a service almost every single day of the week in the Polish neighborhood of Toronto. And you know, I just found it very depressing and dirge-like, and actually frightening. You know, the images of Christ on the cross were extremely frightening to me. But it's ironic because I didn't find images of Kali frightening at all. So, you know, I mean, try and figure that one out. But she was also, she used to get sort of this little newsletter, um, you know, a Polish newsletter that was circulated amongst the population there, the Polish speaking population. And they were always reporting, you know, news of the world. And then every time, I remember distinctively, every time there was some sort of a disaster in India, say a train crash, you know, and 200 people had perished, she would bring the news, you know, in this mock kind of distress to my mother, and she would say, "Oh my God, 200 people have perished. I hope that Salil, my father, I hope that Salil's people are okay, because people are always dying in that country." You know, she was really, you know, doing her best to condition me away from my heathen roots, you could say. But it was very comical, and obviously it didn't work out in her favor in the end.
So not only in your case, because there's one lovely thing you say in the book where you say that, I mean, in one way you say India, the place completed you, but you also say that your mother bloomed on Indian soil. which is such a lovely way to put it, and so surprising in so many ways.
So surprising. And, it's also, it also challenges that notion of, again, home, and that home is necessarily the place or the terrain in which you're born. And my mother, was certainly a challenge to that kind of notion, because everything about her physically was very Polish. She was blonde, blue-eyed, very light-skinned, and yet she thrived more than my father in Calcutta, specifically Calcutta. I mean, our ancestral home was in Shambazar, very, very traditional old Calcutta, environment. And she relished, walking the streets, going to the bazaars, bargaining. She always used to find a tailor. She would always find, fabrics and get clothes tailored. And I don't even know how she communicated, because again, we're talking about the 80s in Kolkata,
Yeah.
right? Very different version of India by and large, and then Kolkata on a micro level, So it was very unexposed to a lot of the world at that time. Even though, of course, Bengalis are very open-minded and have always tried to expose themselves, it wasn't easy to access that kind of exposure. So my mother was just like this figure, this freakish figure floating around Calcutta in those days, and she would wear a sari and eat with her fingers. She, I think, picked up some Bengali. She never picked up Hindi, so she was always like, saying "esho esho," and her little kind of pidgin Bengali phrases stayed with her. Kene kene. She, instead of cow, she would say kene kene kene, because she was always forcing me to eat. Food was her obsession. So it was very peculiar, and yet that was my normal in my family. We never really felt that it was unusual until we saw it with outsiders' eyes. Right? It simply was. And it really was. My other most profound relationship was with India. And that, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but even when she was confined to a wheelchair much later in her life, she continued to, through sheer willpower and grit, to visit India. And that's what gave her a lot of pleasure later on in her life.
Oh, I mean, one of the words that I guess you just need to know in Bangla is the counterpart of kene, which is bas.
Bas.
To say bas, because otherwise, that's the end of you. But since you bring up this idea of kene and your mother's obsession with food, this is something you write about very honestly and openly, about your own relationship with food and eating and disorder, and the fact that your mother comes from Poland, a country that has known great, not necessarily starvation, but hunger and lack of food and food choices. How did she deal with when you were going through eating disorders and things like that?
Yeah, I think she suspected, but obviously it wasn't openly discussed. And, and this started this sort of body dysmorphia and, again, conflicted ideas around food started relatively young for me, probably around, when I just passed over into puberty, maybe 13, 14. And, I still puzzle about it. Because again, my family's culture was so heavily skewed towards food. Food represented so much more than just nourishment. It was how we told our stories, how we preserved the cultural heritage in my house. It was a sign of love, obviously. And, again, my mother, who today, looking back, I can observe with affection that she was a little bit of a hoarder, and I understand where it came from. She lived through the Second World War. She lived with lack. She lived when they wouldn't see butter or eggs for weeks at a time, and so it's very understandable. Now, my mother reacted. Obviously, it was a very knee-jerk reaction to whenever I wouldn't eat. She just couldn't understand it, and she couldn't fathom it, and she couldn't tolerate it. So it became sort of a battle of wills. And I don't think that she suspected that it was a serious disorder at the time. It wasn't spoken about so openly in society in those days. She just thought that I was being willful. And, as the more that I dug in my heels sitting at the dinner table, the more that she would also dig in her heels. So, as I said, it was sort of an expression also of where our dynamic was going at that time. We were both very willful women. And it's that whole idea of that, we were mirroring each other. I was very much my mother's daughter, and I picked up a lot of her um, personality traits. And that is what caused a lot of conflict. But I know it caused my mother a lot of pain. I'm sure that she puzzled through it, but my mother was never a great believer in therapy. It just wasn't something that she was a part of her personal kind of language. And, again, coming from Poland and this idea of self-resilience and being very resilient.
Stoic,
Stoic more than anything else. It wasn't openly discussed, but, she was very pained about it. And that created a charge around food that I think also ironically probably pushed me deeper into my issues with it.
How are you with your own kids and food now? Are you your mother?
I can't believe you asked me that. How dare you? Yes, of course I've become my mother. I have become my mother. It's incredible.
Somewhere she's laughing.
My husband is the one who now sort of tells me to back off. It's okay, and my children, touch wood, are very, very healthy. They're very robust. They have very robust systems. But obviously kids are fussy, and what they liked yesterday, they're going to reject today. And so we've kind of come up with a solution to sort of preserve my state of mind and my nerves. We have a little sand timer. And so I just set the sand timer. It's 15 minutes. So whatever you eat within 15 minutes, that's it. Otherwise, we just sweep it off the table. And it just helps me to sort of disconnect and not fall into that pattern of urging them to eat. I mean, they're just 2.5 years old,
right.
But I watch it. I'm more conscious of it. I watch it. And at the same time, I'm not the superwoman that my mother is. I kind of also am very conscious not to fall into that trap of being the superwoman, being the super mother, and writing the book and looking fabulous and all of that. I reject those notions entirely. So, I mean, if I have to call in for pizza sometimes, I mean, so be it. My mother is the one who cooked every single meal from scratch, who used to take me out into the fields outside of Toronto to harvest, fresh vegetables in the fall, and then we would pickle and we would can and we would, I don't have that in me. I love food, but I have to admit, obviously everyone's been dealing with this during the pandemic, and I've been dealing with it more so having now relocated to Canada for a limited amount of time. I can't cook. I can do it. I don't enjoy it. It doesn't spring from within me. I don't find myself humming while I'm stirring or anything like that. It's a chore. And that's where I deviate strongly from my mother.
So Cooking with Lisa is not going to be a reality show.
It's not.
No. Cooking
Eating,
with
yes.
Stella was a film,
Eating,
but
yes.
Cooking with
That's
Lisa.
why I was very good at judging. I was on Top Chef Canada, and I really enjoyed that. But it had nothing to do with cooking per se for me personally.
She who can cook, she who cannot judges cooking shows. Maybe. But to get back to the book and writing, you've said that you didn't want at one time you didn't want to be an actor or a model. When you were young, you actually wanted to be a writer. And now that you actually have written a book, what have you discovered about the writing life? Is it what you imagined it to be, or is it even more fraught than being a model?
It's even more fraught, but I can't think of anything else. I do feel that this is what I was meant to do. First of all, I just love words. I love words. I love playing with words. I've over the last few weeks, I think I've read probably close to 20 books. I've turned back to reading since I've come to, again, we've relocated to Canada until, in fact, moving back to Asia in August. But you know, being in this small little quiet town where there isn't really a lot to do, I feel very contained, and it's helped me to again reignite that passion for reading. Um, so first of all, I'm a passionate reader. That's really my form of expression. Um, it's damn hard, but it's ultimately worth it. But it's very, very fraught. Fortunately, I'm equipped
It's much
as
lonelier, no,
it's
than
lonely.
like, because in a model like some or acting, somebody is always there giving you feedback and saying that was a great shot, that was a great take, or you see the picture right away and everyone's saying, oh, you look wonderful in it. Here,
Yeah,
you can spend all day working on it, and at the end of the day,
and
you don't know
do if
whether it
it's
was
good.
crap or what
Yeah,
you've done.
yeah. But you know, strangely, Sandeep, my personality is suited to this kind of work. It's better suited. That's why I always say I just fell into acting, modeling, etc., being in front of the camera. It's never suited my personality. I don't like the attention. I don't like. I would feel very stressed out being on a set and being surrounded by people, and not with any extra stressor added in it. You know, it can be the most wonderful set in the world, and I've had some really wonderful experiences. I've been very lucky over the last even few years now in my dotage, you know, as an actor, to have had these very unique opportunities, you know, whether it's, you know, four more shots, etc., you know, to play very interesting characters. um and so there's not been added stress on the set. It's simply being around people stresses me out. That's who I am. So these long periods of sort of solitary work actually suit me.
Does it
I do
stress you
need
out, just
feedback.
people looking at you?
Sorry, I get stressed with
Does it
people
stress
looking.
it out, people looking at you all the time?
Yeah, yeah. It really, really, absolutely does. And that obviously begs the question: well, why have you done it for so long? And I don't know. Again, it's that contradictory part of my nature. There is obviously something that I enjoy about acting specifically today. It's a craft, and I have worked on it for a number of years. So you know, it's in my toolbox. I like taking it out every once in a while, but it stresses me out. It takes me a long time to recover from the intensity of that activity. And and writing, I'm much better suited to writing. I don't mind the long, long periods of solitude. That's what I enjoy. In fact, I'm not getting as much solitude as I'd like being a mother. You know, I mean, obviously, life has changed from that point of view. So these days, because I'm working on something new, I work every morning. It's the one good thing though is it's given me a structure and a discipline. Before, when I was no, you know, kidless, childless. Even when I was married, I was, you know, in charge of my own.
Right.
I was queen of my schedule. You know. Now, in a weird way, it's helped me to
You know.
focus.
Yeah, Anita Desai, I remember, said in an interview that because she had kids and she knew that she had to get her writing done between the time the kids went to school and the time the kids were going to come home from school.
I'm
You know,
home.
so
Yeah,
this was her time, and she'd better get whatever need she needed. And she said it actually helped rather than think, oh, I have all day. I know I can write whenever I want.
I'm hoping. I'm glad you shared that with me because I'm certainly hoping for that.
So when you wrote this book, Close to the Bone, you said very clearly that, you know, even though that your own story of dealing with cancer was so well known and people had written and talked about it, and it's definitely a part of this book, you didn't want to write this book as the cancer book. What
No.
was the story you thought you wanted to tell?
That's interesting. I wanted to tell again a story of perhaps what happens when one embraces, or the possibility of embracing alternative ways of being in the world. I think that's the story I wanted to tell more than anything else, because whatever I've chosen to do, I know that I've chosen to do it in a way that doesn't conform. Even my career is nonconformist, the career that I'm known for. The decisions I've taken on a personal level, the decisions I've taken, in terms of my exploration of the world. And, I think that these days, particularly in the world we're living in today, there are so many lists. You go online and here's 10 ways to accomplish this. 10 ways to become, a successful in a startup, 10 ways to have a successful relationship, 20 ways to I'm so weary of them. I'm so weary of lists. And, what happens when you throw it out, when you throw out the lists and just live according to instinct? What happens? And maybe that's sort of the story that I wanted to tell. And, it isn't all pretty. A lot of it is messy. But I embrace it. For me, that's what life is. Life isn't necessarily trying to sidestep the dark or the shadow. It's really actually embracing that. It's very Jungian to say that actually, enlightenment is actually not conforming to this idealized version of ourselves, but actually embracing the darkness within us and integrating.
So is part of that embrace then, because there is a recurring motif you use throughout the book, especially when you're dealing with your mother's accident, and then when she becomes a quadriplegic and confined, you keep saying, I did what I could do best. I flew away. I flew away. And so in a sense, again, this contradiction thing that you're talking about embracing the darker side, the messier sides, and flying away. But was your flying away also a way of embracing the unknown, perhaps?
Yes, yeah. I mean, a therapist would probably say it's like a coping mechanism. It's about being in denial. And on some level it is. I accept that, and I accept that responsibility, and I have some regrets about it. But, on the other hand, it's very hard to, I don't know, to really define and understand our lives in any sort of in any sort of a concrete context, maybe until we're on our deathbed, and you're looking back. And even then, we're always drawing outside the lines. I think that sometimes the decisions that we make aren't rational. I think, and I think that we're not purely rational creatures at all. I think rationality has been forced upon us, and there is an aspect of us that needs to, there are certain, let's say, prescribed behavior that we should follow. We shouldn't go around stabbing people and etc. But what's most interesting to me is what's in the shadow side. It's not necessarily bad. We have these labels for it, right? It's not necessarily bad. It's just sort of the best that we can do at that time. And and again, I have been actually reading a lot of Jung. And and it's really fascinating what, the way that he defines sort of the human psyche, and the fact that this entire shadow side, if it's not actually opened up and discussed, how it actually runs us, how, we become part of the monster. There's a wonderful actually quote that he said that if you reject this sort of behavior, most likely it's probably deep within you, or triggering something in you. And what ends up happening is, as a collective, as a society, one person grappling with their shadow side is nothing. But as a collective, we create a monster outside of ourselves, and we all form the cells of this monster, and we're helpless to actually, we're helpless when that monster goes on a bloody rampage. That's really, and we're seeing that in the world today. I think a lot of our collective playing out in India, in the US recently, we saw that happen, and that's the shadow side at work. And, if we would, maybe again, shift our perspectives, part of it is having the courage to be vulnerable, to sit around, as Rumi said, and discuss all the mistakes that we've made and laugh at it. But we're not really encouraged to do that. So for me, maybe as a writer, that's the place where I get to really fully embrace that and explore that. And I'm trying to explore that a little bit in my next writing endeavor and go even deeper into it. And I think looking back on Close to the Bone, I could have gone even deeper into that.
So
I could have
what
gone
was the closest to the bone that you got, you know? What in it was closest to the bone?
in the book.
Yeah.
Mm, what I think everything, you know, I think that being able to try to see myself objectively, to describe um, my journey with some objectivity, neither condoning nor censoring, you know, the things that I had done. That's sort of, you know, maybe a life close to the bone, um, emotions close to the bone, certainly. But that's the trick, is finding that little witness, you know, being
No,
able to.
it's actually immensely courageous, Lisa, in a certain way, because certainly you had enough in your material in your life to write an entirely captivating and exciting book that would be
Mm,
great to read, but wouldn't necessarily go anywhere close to the bone. I mean, you have, like, so for example, you have this wonderful story of how you meet Maureen Wadia, who launches
right.
you into Glad Rags for the very first time, and it
Yeah.
involves her dogs coming and biting you in the butt. So stories like that would be fabulous to read, but at the same time, they would be letting you off the hook, right? In a certain way.
Yeah, they would be letting me off the hook. There was no point, you know. And I mean, let's go back to the fact, Sandeep, is that I've always wanted to be a writer. So I think maybe the most fundamental um, force, you know, or intention behind Close to the Bone was to launch myself as a writer. And to write sort of a pretty packaged memoir did not interest me at all, nor did it interest me maybe to write, you know, something what I call tragedy porn. You know, to sort of, you know, attempt to sort of cash in on this kind of a, you know, persona, you know, that sometimes is forced upon me. I mean, I'm nothing. I'm no martyr. I'm messy as hell. I'm, you know, I am who I am. And I thought that this is my opportunity to take this opportunity to write. Like, if I had been offered, if it was very easy for me maybe to write fiction, if that was on my plate, and if I had an offer from a publisher to write fiction, I would have done that. But obviously, there's a challenge. There's an innate challenge in being sort of this, having this known
Mm.
persona, which really frustrates me a lot of the time, to be honest. But, you know, having this very known persona, being in the celebrity category, that I knew that I would have to, you know, deal with people's perceptions of me. So doing a memoir was obviously the most natural thing. The offer was there on the table, but I said, I have to make this memoir. I have to make this the best memoir that I can write about me. I have to make it so much more than that, and more than, hopefully more than a story that is sort of flavor of the month. It's going to sell for 1 month, and, you know, and then everyone forgets about it. And that was my aspiration, and that it would lead to other books, obviously, that people could say,
I'm
you know.
sure it will. But you know, one of the things you do write so much about, you know, like for example, this Times of India votes you one of the top 10 most beautiful women of the millennium, and you talk about that, how that can also become a burden. You know, your image in the red swimsuit is the rage of the thing, but then you're always Lisa in the red swimsuit in people's heads, and
Yeah.
I'm curious, now that this book has been out for a little while, have you heard from people, younger people now who are in the fashion beauty industry and all of that, who have read the book and reacted in any way to it?
I
Or has
get
that industry changed entirely?
I'm you know, I mean, in this respect, social media is great because you get sometimes very instantaneous feedback from readers, and I do really appreciate that and love that. And I would also encourage anyone out there that, believe me, I think most writers do appreciate the feedback, because as Sandeep pointed out, it's very lonely. There's a lot of self-doubt along the way. So, you know, whatever your feelings, it's great to reach out to, I think, an author and let them know. And I really appreciate that. That's been, ongoing on social media, so that I do get, I think, fairly authentic feedback. And, a lot of people have reacted very positively, and, and, and I think that there's a certain relatability that they didn't feel before with me, probably. Um, and that's really about writing about our flaws and our failures. That's the place where we ultimately connect the most. And I've never been one, particularly over the last few years. I've really been shedding what I call the pathology of perfection, of trying to appear something that I'm not. Nobody's perfect, and I don't even attempt to go there anymore. So it's been a wonderful exercise in maybe my ultimate kind of subconscious thrust in all of this is being able to put myself, my flawed self, forward, who I love today much more than the image of myself that, has ruled people's minds, for many years. So I love that I can bring a more authentic version of myself forward. As a writer, that was fundamental. And it still frustrates me, some people. I have to tell you, it's my biggest pet peeve that I still get, honestly, people talking about Afreen. It's been 30 years. And, or, when I post something on social media and, and I realize nobody's actually read the text, which I've, worked on and labored over, and they're just reacting to the photograph or the image and saying, "Oh, so nice, so beautiful." I mean, it's very, that's the world that we live in. But I'm also, I tread carefully only because I'm grateful to my career. Obviously, it's given me a lot of perks and a lot of opportunities and a lot of great material to write about for the rest of my life. So I'm very grateful. And it gave me the opportunity to live in India and
Yeah.
have a particular relationship with India. I have again two very different relationships with India. There's the relationship with Kolkata, which is very, again, my childhood, my heritage, my legacy, just everyday Kolkata. And then there's my relationship of this, this figure living in Mumbai. And then I have a third relationship with India that I write about, which was, sort of that exploration,
Spiritual.
that migration almost across India to discover it for myself. And these are all me. They're all within me. There's, and it was very important to be able to break out of that singular, two-dimensional image that everyone seems to associate me with. And I mean, some, it's changed for sure, but people still send me songs from my first Hindi film, Kasoor, and tell me how much they love it. And it's very sweet, right? But,
What
it's
song
okay.
was what was the song in Kasur?
Kitni bechen, kitni bechen, something, something. Even I don't remember. But it's super sweet. It's super sweet. But something in me gets a little bit triggered, because I do feel that I've moved on.
That you've
It's like
moved on.
I've moved on, and it's interesting. It'd be like, with many other people, like imagine what you did in your 20s. Imagine if that was like haunting you for the rest of your life, but like in actual kind of material bites or images that would just keep popping up, right? I think for most of us, it's nothing that I'm ashamed of at all, but we've moved on, and we want to be viewed today, particularly as a woman, particularly where India is today, and particularly with a lot of the movements that are going on, uh, for women. We want to be seen holistically, as much more than just what we can offer physically.
So now, when you are in India, do you feel, as a woman, that the country has made, like, did you actually feel freer in your time in Mumbai, where someone describes you as the last of the flower children, or as opposed to now in a supposedly more liberated and open India?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a bit charged, but I do say that I actually felt freer in the 90s in Mumbai, specifically Mumbai, of course.
Hmm.
I felt freer in the 90s. I mean, I live, I have a home in Bandra in Bombay, Mumbai. Um, and Bandra obviously is its own little bubble. It's its own little mini cosmos. So we're very freely. We all walk around in shorts on the roadside, and it's a very, sort of casual. Also, a lot of I'm going to say expats. That's a charged word. A lot of foreigners, but also a lot of, a lot of people in my business floating around. So it does feel very free and liberal in Bandra specifically, and in Mumbai. But I don't know. I don't feel, and I traveled, I have really immersed myself in India. I've traveled everywhere and not on a sort of five-star ticket. And I don't know how I feel today about, and I did all of that alone. I was a sole woman traveler. I don't know if I would think twice today.
Mm.
And that's
Yeah.
twice today. Not in the South, to be honest, but in other parts of India. I would think twice today about retracing the steps that I took when I was, a young woman in my 20s and doing all this solo travel in India. There are, it's complex. There are certain aspects that is wonderful. I love seeing the next generation of young women in India, how they are, it's a movement. Because in the 90s, it was just a few people. It was too few to call it a movement. Today, I would say it's a movement. Young women moving from smaller cities to
Mm.
fulfill dreams in Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata as well. I love what the next generation is doing in terms of reinterpreting, fashion design. All of this stuff is very, very exciting to me. So there's a lot of intellectual stimulus. There's a lot more, I think, intellectual stimulus for
Yeah.
me.
Well, as we started said in the beginning, things are a contradiction. There is no easy answer to
There's
any
no
of
easy
these.
answer.
Yes. But I know we're almost out of time here, so I'll bring it back to Kolkata again, since that's where we started. When you come to Kolkata, are there still any must-do rituals or things for you when you come here?
Yes, let me see. We have to walk College Street, my father and I, and then he always points out Presidency College where he went, and we have to do a darshan of Presidency College, and then we go to the coffee house, of course. I do love Peter Cat. I have once legit almost missed a flight because I insisted on, after an event, going to Peter Cat, and I did not realize that the traffic was so bad. So we were stuck on Park Street, and our heart in our mouths. And I think it was like I had to catch this flight because there was another flight, and everything like that. But I needed my chelu kebabs. I was not leaving without my chelu kebabs. And I love hitting Experimenter Gallery. Priyanka and Raja are very good friends, and I love what they do. I love the space. I love the
Mm.
space in Bangladesh, actually, specifically. I could just, again, sit there for hours. I love catching up with, some friends like Karuna. She's really plugged into the scene of, young, hip kind of design and
Mm.
bookstores and restaurants and exciting things that are going on in the city. Um, and I visit my family, of course. And if I get a chance, I love going out to Shirampur.
Well, I think this means that the next time you come here, we're going to have to organize that cello
You and I
kebab
got to
for
hang
you.
next time. I want to see Kolkata through your eyes.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll round it off. The next Lisa Ray event will be sponsored by Peter Cat after this glowing endorsement you gave the cello kebab right now. But on that note, thanks so much for joining us today, Lisa, and good luck with your next book. We'll be waiting for that.
Thank you so much. And I really always enjoy our conversations. And I mean it, huh, Sandeep?
Thank you. Thank you. I
There.
think I enjoyed speaking with you as well. Thank you.